Mr. Chairman, you're muted.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the April 12 meeting of the Chatham Finance Committee. Pursuant to Governor Baker's June 16, 2021 signing of an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, including the extension of his March 12, 2021 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law until July 15, 2022. This meeting of the Chatham Finance Committee is being conducted via remote participation. Every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in the order. A reminder that persons who would like to listen to this meeting while in progress may do so by calling the phone number 508-945-4410, conference ID 345-753-125 #, or one may join the meeting online via Microsoft Teams through the link in the posted agenda. Despite our best efforts, we may not be able to provide for real-time access, and we will post a record of this meeting on the town's website as soon as possible. In accordance with town policy, the public can speak to any issue/hearing or business item on the agenda during this meeting when recognized by me, the chair. I'll start with a roll call, please. Barb Madison?
Here.
Thank you. Joanne Sprague?
Here.
Thank you. Andy Young?
Here.
Tommy Doan?
Here.
John Whalen?
Here.
John Papalardo? And the chair is present. We have a quorum. I will note the appearance of a number of participants in this meeting. I can only assume that they are individuals who wish to speak to one of our articles on our agenda, and as such, I think I will impose a limit of 3 minutes per speaker on each of the agenda items, so we continue to move through the meeting expeditiously, which may or not be something we've done so far. In any case, we are going to continue our FY23 article review in anticipation of annual town meeting, beginning with a citizens petition, article number 56, displacement of airport runways number 6 and 24. Is there a petitioner who wishes to speak to Article 56?
Mr. Chairman, this is the petitioner was Tom Gagan, who's unable to be here, as Mr. Fulton had explained earlier. What I will do is I can introduce the article through the minutes that were from the Select Board's meeting of March 22nd, when this was presented to the Select Board, and just go over some of the highlights of what Mr. Gagan presented. And then I would ask Mr. Fulton if he has any additional comments that he would like to make, since he did say that he was very involved in this or knowledgeable about this article, if that's acceptable to you and to Mr. Fulton.
No, that sounds fine from my side. Mr. Fulton, you good with that?
I'd be happy to speak to that. Thank you, Alex.
Very good. Thank you, Alex. So what I think we'll probably do, Alex, is after you, we will allow Mr. Fulton, as Alex has said, to make any observations he wishes to add. I will then open it up to questions from the Finance Committee. I would then like to suggest that the Airport Commission, I'd like to ask them for their observations on the proposed article, after which we will open it up to questions or statements from the general public. So with that, Alex, please.
Okay, thank you. Yes, this is a citizen's petition for the displacement of airport runways number 6 and 24. Thresholds should be 800 feet at the end of the fiscal runway. The petitioner, Tom Gagan, again, is unable to attend right now. However, from the Select Board meeting minutes of March 22nd, I'm going to just have a synopsis of this. So the proposal was an 800-foot displacement of the runway, which would make the effective runway length 2,200 feet. And then Mr. Gagan had said that airplanes that land at the airport would need to land in the displaced area, but planes taking off would have access to the entire length of the runway. He noted that the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, recommends an RPZ, that's a runway protection zone, based on an airport property to minimize danger to civilians. And he said he believed that the displacement would reduce the inherent risk of undershooting the landing area and would reduce exposure to liabilities for having development in West Chatham area affected by the RPZ. In your packet, and also referred to here in the minutes, were written opinions from town council and special counsel. And I do see that the special counsel is on this call today. if you have any questions of the airport special counsel. So it was suggested that decreasing the length of the usable runway would create less safe landing conditions. Mr. Gagan went on further to state that the northernmost part of the RPZ would be completely on airport property, and the southernmost part would be pulled substantially closer to the airport. Let's reiterate that the airport is currently in compliance with the FAA regulations, and FAA reports from 2016 were cited. There was discussion about the rezoning of West Chatham. I think there's probably some people who wish to speak to that later. So again, Mr. Gagan reiterated that the full length of the runway would be available to planes taking off, but planes landing would need to utilize displaced runway of 2,200 feet. Again, the opinions of Town Council and Aviation Special Counsel stated that both petitions would be inconsistent with federal law, and those were noted several times in the discussion. There was just, Mr. Gagan suggested there was poor communication between the Planning Board and Airport Commission. As you might recall, the Planning Board, there was a petition that was referred back, I believe, to the Planning Board. So that was some of that. Oh, that's right. There was a negative vote from the Planning Board on March 14th regarding the RPZ. And then the Airport Commission Chair, who's on this call, also was asked to comment, and I will not go over those right now because I'm sure Mr. Harrison would like to comment on some of those. And then his petition was not against the success of the airport, but aimed at increasing public safety around the airport. And that's really what I have on the from the notes. And I would be happy to allow Mr. Fulton to add any comments right now regarding the citizens petition.
Mr. Fulton, any comments that you'd like to offer to supplement Alex's?
Just to make it clear, the Planning Board has never taken up these matters. What the Planning Board disapproved of was the Airport Commission's idea of an overlay zone in the runway protection.
Let me just jump in here, please. That's not a subject to Article 56 nor something this committee is on the agenda to discuss. So I appreciate the point, but we're not here to discuss planning board activities relating to RPZs or overlay districts. So if we can stick to Article 56.
When Alex said that they disapproved the RPZ, I thought it was a little bit confusing.
I agree.
In any event, speaking to just Article 56, there are a number of different interests that are involved here. Indeed, there are 8 people, 8 Chatham residents who own airplanes that are based at the Chatham Airport. And I'm not surprised to hear those 8 people ask for being opposed to something like this. And in fact, I wouldn't be surprised if they asked that the runway length be doubled in size. But this article was drafted for the safety of the hundreds and thousands of people who come through the RPZ every single day. The RPZ in Chatham, the runway protection zones, are extremely unsafe. There are homes in them. There are businesses in them. There are 2 major roads, including a state 28.
Mr. Fulton, can I just interrupt here? Can I get you please to focus on Article 56, which is the displacements of the thresholds? Again, we're not here to discuss RPZs. We're here to discuss Article 56, please.
Yeah, Article 56 is designed to enhance safety in the RPZs. So one really cannot, if there were no problems in the RPZs today, there would be no reason for this warrant article. But the fact is the RPZs are extremely unsafe today, and by displacing the threshold by 800 feet, you pull the RPZs closer to the airport. Now, ideally, the FAA recommends that RPZs be on airport property. As much as we might want to do that here, that could not be done because that would shorten the runway too much. This shortens the landing distance of the runway to 2,200 feet, and I could give you anywhere from a half a dozen to a dozen airports that have runways 2,200 feet in length or even shorter than that. But this measure, if it passes, would move every single residential home out of the unsafe runway protection zone. And that is well worth doing. We had a situation, as some of you know, on September 9th, 2021, in which a turboprop airplane overshot the Provincetown runway and landed 950 feet into the runway protection zone in a group of saplings. Thank God, Provincetown has a safe runway protection zone. If something like that were to happen in Chatham, people would die. There's no question, because that plane, when it crashed, burst into flames. And if it bursts into flames into a home or a business or into travelers or into Meshervy's Shell station, the results would be horrific. But this is designed for safety of people on the ground. And that's why it is done. And I understand that there are some people who are attending this meeting who are less concerned about the safety of people on the ground and more concerned with the safety of pilots.
All right. Well, I think I'm going to interrupt you there, if I could, please. I really want to focus on a presentation about Article 56 and not start characterizing individuals one way or the other. Is there anything else you'd like the Finance Committee to know about Article 56? Otherwise, we'll just go to the next step of the meeting. You will have an opportunity to speak your opinion along with everybody else when that time comes.
Okay. Well, I just want to mention that the object of both of these warrant articles is to improve public safety, particularly in West Chatham. My friend Rick Levitt was intimately involved in both of these warrant articles. He's at home recovering from COVID and is a bit weak, and doctor's orders. He cannot attend today's meeting, but if he were here, he would have asked me to tell you that he's a strong proponent of affordable housing in West Chatham. And both of these warrant articles make affordable housing a possibility in West Chatham. It would be rather appalling, however, to not enact either of these runway protection, either of these warrant articles and build affordable housing in an already inadequate and unsafe runway protection zone.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there, please, because I think we're veering into personal opinion, which I'd like to save for the public comment period. Let me start by asking members of the Finance Committee if they have any questions, either for Alex, please, or I suppose for Mr. Fulton. John Whalen, your hands up, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fulton, do you know how many homes are in the RPZ and how many businesses are in the RPZ now?
I don't know precisely, but I believe there are over a dozen homes, and I haven't counted the number of businesses, but needless to say, the businesses south of the airport, due south on Route 28, are in the RPZs, and the businesses on George Ryder Road North are all in the RPZ.
Alex, I see your hands up. Is that something you have some data for John for, please?
Yes, in the explanation from the citizens petition, it says that the RPZ contains stores, offices, 2 roads, including Route 28, and 19 family residences.
Thank you, Alex.
That's helpful, Alex. Thank you. John, does that suit, or is there anything further?
That's adequate. Thank you very much.
Very good, thank you. Further questions from the committee? All right, if not for the time being, then I think I'd like to ask Mr. Harrison, as chairman of the Airport Commission, or is Mr. Harrison here? Yes. Mr. Harrison, is there anything you'd like to offer up, please, in respect of Article 56 from the commission's perspective, please? Not necessarily yours per se, but the commission's, please.
Yes, I would. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think there are 2 different situations here. One is the displaced threshold situation, which is part of it. And the other part of it is the RPZ and the relationship between the 2. If I have time, I'll go into detail on that, but frankly, just to give my overall view and what my conversations with the FAA have been with regard to this, is that first of all, the town does not get to select the location of the RPCs. And pulling them onto the airport is not going to change anything, because there are RPZs for departure and there are RPZs for arrival. They're the same RPZs and they're all measured from the same place, which is the end of the runway, not the beginning of the just any displaced threshold if such would exist. But as I said, the town doesn't get to select the location. They are there based on the configuration of the airport and the runway. By placing the RPZ on an airport, on the airport property, would essentially devalue the airport, and we would be out of grant assurance compliance. And basically, you decrease safety by by displacing thresholds or trying to bring the RPZs onto the airport, which, like I said, you can't do anyway. They're there. They're where they are. What we have to do as a town is protect the federal investment that's been made in the airport. And I can tell you that the FAA would not take kindly to anything that the town would do to devalue the airport or decrease the safety of the airport. Any airport projects that are currently going on are there to increase safety, not to expand the airport. Also, I truly believe that the community doesn't understand the role the airport plays in the emergency system and transportation system, whether that be state or national, doesn't matter. It's a prime piece in each of those systems. And needless to say, the FAA has no desire to decrease the value of the airport. And I know from what I've heard from them is that there could be a financial ripple effect to the community. Because if we're out of compliance and refuse to comply, the adverse impact to the airport could invoke clawbacks from the federal government. So I strongly would say that certainly from the Airport Commission's point of view, we could not support Article 56. And without going into the technicalities of runway lengths and displaced thresholds and measurements of RPZs, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Alex, I think you made a reference to counsel that was on the call. I know in the package that we received, there was an opinion both from Pat Costello, our town council, as well as I believe the counsel to the Airport Commission. either Alex or Mr. Harrison, is the Airport Commission Council available? Is that the reference, Alex?
I
'Cause I get-
believe, Yeah, I
He's
think
on the
so.
line.
Because I guess I would like to understand, and perhaps the committee would like to hear as well.
Attorney
What?
Makarios is here.
All right, what the assertion is regarding legality or the illegality of these proposed amendments. So, Mr. Harrison, if you could refer us to whomever, that'd be great, please.
Yeah, Attorney Makarios is online.
I'm here. Thank you, Huntley. My name is Mina Macarius. I'm from Anderson and Krieger in Boston. Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. Our view, as you saw in the correspondence, I think you've already reviewed, is that these articles are outside of the purview of town meeting. Huntley described the FAA regulations and requirements correctly. When cities or when any airport owner, public airport owner especially, takes federal money, they commit to certain grant assurances, and they cannot change, among other things, airports layouts without going back to FAA, and FAA strongly disfavors that where there's been federal funding spent on it. So should this pass town meeting, it would either be of no legal effect, it would be null and void because it wouldn't be enforceable, or if the airport tried to enforce it, it could, as Mr. Harrison alluded to, subject a town to a loss of future federal funding, a clawback of funding that's been provided to date, as well as potential litigation with users of the airport and the federal government.
All right, thank you, Attorney Makarios. So I'll turn it back to the committee then. Questions for either the chairman of the Airport Commission or their attorney, Attorney Makarios.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to
Yes,
ask
please.
a question if I could.
Yep, please.
If we have a moment, our consultant from Gale Associates would like to say a little bit about this whole situation as well, if we have a moment.
We can certainly create a moment. First, though, I'd like to see Andy Young has his hand up as a member of the committee. Andy, question, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In reading the articles as well as the attorney's opinions, I guess the part that I have a question about is both articles are written as proscriptive, whereas the attorney's opinions seem to indicate that the FAA has the ability to approve either of these two changes or both, so long as they think it's suitable and indeed adds to public safety. Now, the Airport Commission, I gather, has chosen not to do that, has not asked the FAA to approve either of these. Failing that, are there any other avenues that the petitioners could pursue with FAA?
So let me comment on the first part. I don't want to be misunderstood here. While FAA can change airport layouts, shortening, and this may be where Gale Associates, this might be the perfect moment for them to chime in. Airports rarely are granted the ability to minimize or limit runway length. I know that there's been references in other meetings to certain places where it has happened here or there. This particular runway is already, from FAA standpoint, on the shorter end as far as runways go. They take, for good reason, safety as a primary piece, as well as the service of ability to serve a variety of aircraft and to not limit different users from using the airport. So it's beyond simply, if you ask, there's a process. It would have to go through NEPA, it would have to go through a whole lot more than a simple ask. I guess I would defer to Gale Associates if there's other sort of technical reasons why that ask wouldn't go there too, but I don't want to cut you off.
Let me continue just for a second then. I mean, it appears from the articles and from the legal opinions that have been rendered that this is going to be a financial black hole if the town meeting approves this and the town attempts to enforce it. And I think that's a financial disaster for the town. And that's why my initial position, at least, is to oppose both of these articles. From the standpoint of being a finance committee. If there was some other alternative for the petitioners or for others to approach FAA, fine, let them go do that. But I don't see the town being, I fear the town being on the financial hook for this. Essentially, that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Mr. Harrison, have you got a reference to Gale?
Yeah,
Associates of
Mr. Karen,
Consulting?
are you there?
Hey, Huntley. Yes, I am. And good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here this evening. I'm going to try and respect your 3-minute time limit, but I will stick strictly to the point of displaced thresholds and touch upon some of the options that may be available to the authors of the articles. But first and foremost, the proposed article references the Federal Aviation Administration Advisory Circular 150-5300-13B, which is the FAA's design manual for airports. So essentially, all of the facilities at the airport follow this manual in terms of their design criteria. And I noticed that the article takes this design manual out of context and it ignores the basic requirement that's listed in section 3.5.3.2, which states, and I will quote, "Consider a displaced threshold only after a full evaluation establishes that displacement is the best available alternative. While threshold displacement is a convenient solution for constrained airports, the evaluation needs to weigh the trade-offs and consequences of a displaced threshold." Now, I've been following the article very closely, and I've been listening to the presentations, that were made during the select board meeting. And not once have I heard or seen a full evaluation prepared by the authors of this article weighing the trade-offs and consequences of displacing the threshold. I'm unaware of any correspondence or coordination that the proponents of the article have had with the Federal Aviation Administration or Mass DOT Aeronautics Division for that matter. I've personally discussed with FAA New England region regarding this proposal, and it is not supported by the FAA for the following reasons, and I'll be brief on this as well. It introduces an even greater safety issue, which is the limitation of available runway for landing at Chatham. In accepting federal funds over the years, the town has a contractual obligation that it won't make or permit any changes or alterations in the airport or any of its facilities which are not in conformity with the airport layout plan as approved by the Secretary, and which might, in the opinion of the Secretary, adversely affect the safety, the utility, and I want to emphasize that word utility, or efficiency of the airport. And so having personally worked with the Airport Commission in preparing its airport layout plan, I can assure you that this proposed change to the utility of the runway is not on an approved airport layout plan supported by the Secretary. The FAA is also crystal clear in Appendix H of that design advisory circular that I referenced that the full operational use of the paved runway is, quote, optimum. In short, Mr. Chair, as written, this article and I apologize, I don't see the last name of the Finance Committee member, I just see him as Andy, but to sort of touch upon what he's saying, this article, in my opinion, is asking the town to blindly support and engage in, quote, any and all legal proceedings without having conducted a full evaluation of the trade-offs and consequences of the proposal. And as clearly stated in FAA 150-5300-13B, the vetting process with the FAA to see if that is the most optimum use of the airport, which, in displacing the threshold. So I would say that basic requirement has, at best been largely ignored.
All right, that's very helpful, Mr. Karen. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Further questions from the committee, please? If not, I will open it up randomly to whoever gets their hand up first. All right, here we go. Let's see here. So Gavin A, please. Oh, I'm sorry, but Gavin, before you go, I see Barb Madison, committee member. Barb, your hands up, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just a little confused by something that a former speaker said. he said that the FAA seemed more concerned with the safety of the pilots than the safety of people on the ground, where I always thought that the safer a pilot is, the safer everybody on the ground is. So I don't understand the difference there. I mean, I think a safe pilot is driving a safer plane and less likely to crash into people on the ground.
There would seem to be a certain irreducible logic to your point. Is that something that whoever made that observation would like to comment on, please? If not, we'll go to questions or observations from the public. All right, Barb. Well, we'll just have to hold that question in suspense, I guess, for the time being. Gavin A., please.
Yes, thank you. And I would just ask that people who aren't speaking mute their microphones. That would be helpful. Thank you. So, hello, my name is Gavin Archibald, and I'm an aircraft owner, hangar owner, and pilot operating out of the Chatham Airport. Shortening a runway never increases safety. Shortening a runway and increasing the glide path at the same time never increases safety. These two articles are about choking the Chatham Airport in an effort to close the airport. It is a well-known fact that airplane traffic is the lifeblood of an airport. You shorten the runway, you reduce the airplane traffic. You reduce the number of people who care about the airport, you gain control of the airport. The issue at hand is about shutting down the Chatham Airport. It always has been. These articles are, if they're allowed to pass, send a message to the anti-airport crowd that the town supports closing the airport. We need to look no further than the Marlborough Airport and its closure to see what happens when an airport has a short runway. Planes stop coming. If these articles were truly about safety, then why the type-specific article that targets types similar to the Pilatus? The reason that article exists is because the Pilatus and its unique characteristics would allow it to continue to operate on the shorter runway. So the group wants to eliminate the Pilatus, which is their sworn enemy, as well as shortening the runway, which cuts off traffic. That's why it is disingenuous to say these two articles are about safety. If the runway is shortened, I will have to leave the Chatham Airport, as I cannot safely operate my twin-engine aircraft from the shortened runway. Chatham with a shortened runway is a useless airport. After 10 years of attempts to shut down the Chatham Airport, have we learned nothing about this group? They do not care about the cost to the town, as we saw with the skydive controversy. If these bills are allowed to pass, they will cost the town millions in grant assurance paybacks to the federal and state governments. The legality of these bills is highly suspect, but let's do the right thing. Do not abstain from voting and vote no on these two articles. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next on my list is a Dana S. Quinn, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to speak, as well as committee members too. I'm going to try and stick with just facts as best I can and try and keep my personal opinion out of this. I spent 27 years in the military flying airplanes, and 33 years at Delta Airlines as an international airline captain, flying all over the world. Not that that has anything to do with the facts of this particular case, but I truly believe Mr. Fulton actually does want a safer Chatham Airport, but I'm having a real hard time wrapping my head around shutting a runway down or taking away more than 25% of the landing surface, how that enhances safety. I fly into a little airport in Mattituck, New York, and it is exactly 2,200 feet long. And every time I go in there with my wife, along with my 33,000 flight hours, it's a job. It's a lot of work to get in there, and I've got to be on my game. So we're asking every pilot now that goes into a 3,001 foot Chatham Airport to now be at the very top of their game and make sure that they land past the 800 feet that this article is attempting to take away of perfectly good concrete to land on. So what that means is we've got 800 feet less to stop the aircraft. Now, as far as the grant assurances and things are concerned, I'm concerned for the town of Chatham and the finances too, that we take grant assurances when Route 6 is built. We take grant assurances when Route 28 is built, and the federal government pays a substantial chunk of that. But I don't see anybody coming up and saying, well, you know, we like Route 6. It's really great, but I think we should bring the sidelines in a little bit. And I don't like pickup trucks. So maybe we shouldn't have pickup trucks on Route 6 because they make a little bit more noise than a regular automobile does. No pilot, by the way, and myself included, knows where an RPZ is. All we look at is the beginning of the runway to land on and how much room we have to stop the airplane on the far end. That's all me and most pilots care about is that landing distance. And to take away more than 25% of that landing distance, as Gavin has already mentioned, it's going to knock him out of the running to even keep his airplane there, and he's going to have to go someplace else. So for the folks that do want to keep the Chatham Airport, which by the way is a gem, that's why I
20 seconds, please, Mr. Quinn.
Yes, sir. I'll finish up right now. That's the reason I moved here, is because Chatham is a small airport, but I don't like the idea of it getting even smaller. Thank you so much for your time, folks. I really appreciate you listening.
Thank you. All right, I have a Katie, please. Katie, you still with us?
There we go.
All right, well, maybe we'll come back to Katie. I see John Seldorf, please.
Working? Is it now?
Oh, there's Katie. Sounds like Katie.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Katie Buckley Waters, and I'm similar to Dana's background. I'm a retired airline captain with over 20,000 hours. And as a pilot, I speak to you about safety, yet I'm here today as a Chatham kid who grew up right under the traffic pattern of runway 24. I speak to you really of how I grew up frugal, especially not wasting money, nor anyone else's. So right now, I speak to the fact that what is at stake here financially impacts us all. Adopting Article 56 would be catastrophic to the Chatham taxpayers. The federal government and possibly state government will bring litigation against the town, causing taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I would imagine that many here can remember the cost of skydiving litigation to the town and hence the taxpayer. In addition, grant assurances from the federal government in the amount of millions of dollars, like we're talking $7 million, would have to be repaid by the town and Chatham taxpayers. Thirdly, going forward, under such an arrangement would mean that the town would have to bear the cost of operating the airport without state or federal funds. And let us not ignore the fact that a recent study by the Mass Department of Transportation estimated that the airport creates 150 jobs and provides almost 14 million in economic benefit to the community. So to this local kid, that's more than a fortune. That's why the Chatham Airport is considered a gem. And when the time comes and the people are interested in the safety of the airport and what instruments approaches do to enhance the safety in Chatham, I'm looking forward to that opportunity because unfortunately, some people are under the impression it is a VFR, a visual airport only, when in fact it has instrument approaches that can land on both runways. It gets interesting out there, but I want to be sure that people do understand Chatham is not a visual airport only. The instrument pilots know that. Thank you for your time.
Very good. Thank you. All right. I now have back to John Seldorf, please. Mr. Seldorf, you there?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep, we can hear you now.
Okay, sorry, I'm doing this from a mobile spot because I couldn't do it. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I am a Chatham resident. I have been an owner in Chatham for years, a full-time resident for 7 years. Pilot, I own a aircraft based at Chatham, and I own a Pilatus, which I use personally. So the characterization of larger planes as being only for commercial air traffic is incorrect. It is most planes we're talking about here. I'm able to live in Chatham because I can commute to my office, which is in West Hartford, Connecticut, via the plane, and it enables a lifestyle which my wife and I have surely loved and would not want to change. My big concern with these motions are that what Mr. Archibald said, which is they're really disguised to reduce the safety and ultimately close the airport, which I think is the issue at hand, and that will be fought, very, very heavily by not only the commitments that have already been made by the Chatham to the FAA and others, but also by those who do use the airport and see value there. I see there's many solutions that will improve the safety of the airport without restricting its usability for the full length of the current runway that have been basically fought because of concern that it's going to somehow make Chatham's airport, longer or for more commercial traffic, and that's really not the case. So this is not the way to enhance the safety of the airport. It is a way to cost the town literally hundreds of thousands of dollars to defend what is really already known to be an illegal act, and it just seems a shame for us to knowingly approve a proposal that will cost the town money and a long fight. So with those comments, I hope you'll turn down this proposal.
Very good. Thank you for that. We now have a Burke, either Jan Burke, perhaps. Jan Burke.
Hello, am I there?
You're here now.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Jan Burke. I'm a resident at 5 Ridge Cove Lane in West Chatham, where I own my property. And I'd just like to offer a couple of perspectives. First, I've been a land use and municipal lawyer for a long, long time. I've been a pilot for a long time, and I'm a taxpayer here in the community. And I'd like to just offer a couple of thoughts from those different perspectives. First, a slightly different approach as a lawyer who has drafted many bylaws of this type and warrant articles. The kindest thing I think I can say about these articles are they're not particularly well crafted. These are not works of art. They are very ambiguous and lack some basics that a bylaw would need. First of all, they use some very technical terms, aviation-wise technical terms without definition. Good bylaws start with definitions. Most of the time when we have draft bylaws, we would start by drafting an amendment to the definition section of the bylaw to define the terms that are going to be in the bylaw. Then you have a second article to actually draft the bylaw. This does not do that. And the terms for instance, I'm referring to in Article 56, there's a problem with 57 the same way. Displaced thresholds, thresholds are not defined, runways are not defined, and displacement is not defined, all of which you might think are pretty simple, but they're not. There are different interpretations of what those things mean. Let me give you an example. There's a body of definition that suggests that thresholds are the beginning and the end of the useful runway area. If you apply what the wording here is in the first paragraph literally, you have a shortening of the runway at both ends by 800 feet. Read this carefully where it says the thresholds and the ends. This is ambiguous. Ambiguousness leads to disagreement. Disagreement leads to lawsuits. And this is going to be a lawyer's delight, this bylaw. And it's poorly drafted and needs to have a real go. It doesn't say what part of the bylaw this is going to go in other than it's a general bylaw. It's not a work of art, shall we say. The worst part about it, though, is the next part, where it talks about that the town shall, not may, but shall direct an attorney on behalf of the town. That's not now town council necessarily. So that sounds like big law firm to me. And then we will engage in any and all legal proceedings. So does that mean if the town manager goes to enforce this bylaw and loses in Superior Court, you are now obligated to appeal to SJC, to the appeals court? Yes. If you lose at the appeals court, are you obligated to go to the SJC? Well, I think as member Andy, sorry, I don't know your last name, suggested, this is a black hole. This is a lawyer's annuity, if you ask me.
30 seconds, please.
Okay. Lastly, I'll leave the comments to the safety part of this all to others, and I would just say as a Chatham taxpayer, I am not thrilled with the idea of having my tax money go to support legal action to try and please people who are displeased with the airport, who should handle this privately and should go through the existing channels of FAA if they want to change these things and not put the town in the position of being rule makers or operators of an airport. It's not their business, and these are not articles that are ready for prime time, nor should they even be on the floor of town meeting. As a taxpayer, I don't want to see these things move. These are a waste of money and time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have, please, Hart.
Hi there. My name is Hart Fessenden. I'm a Chatham homeowner, and I'm a pilot. A lot of what I was going to say has been said, so I don't want to repeat the same points over. But to Jan's point about litigation, to Andy Young's point about litigation, clearly this would be a black hole that would cost Chatham taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars. One only needs to look at the skydiving fiasco or the issue with the Monomoy Flats and the federal government and shellfishing to see how expensive litigation can get. There's also the issue of potentially having to pay back the feds for the grant assurances, the money that they've given to maintain the airport over the years, and so forth. But what I think is really telling about all this is this simple point. Katie mentioned that in 2019, the Mass DOT did a subject that 156 jobs were at stake related to the Chatham Airport and $14 billion of community benefit came from the airport. I find it really amazing that given all those families supported by the airport, that a few people would think it would be a good idea to shorten the airport, make it less viable as an economic engine for the town. I just shake my head at it. And I know that some of those people have said, oh, well, Mass DOT inflated those numbers. Well, let's just say they did. Let's just say they inflated them by 50%. That still means there's 75 jobs related to the airport, and there's also 7 million of economic benefit to the town. I think that's substantial. I think that Chatham deserves that money, and certainly the families who owe their livelihood to the Chatham Airport need to have a strong and viable airport. These articles will undercut the viability of the airport. They're going to make the airport less safe. I think you don't have to be a pilot to understand that a shorter runway is more dangerous. And with that, I will conclude my remarks.
Very good. Thank you for that. Okay, Ms. Brooke, you did mute your mic. Thank you. I've got a CG, please.
It's Carol Gordon from South Chatham. And
Welcome.
I just want, thank you. I would just like to say, no matter how you feel about the warrant articles, I would really like to take out of the equation that a group or more want to close the airport. I don't think anyone wants to close the airport. Well, put it this way, I can't speak for everyone, but I don't know anyone who wants to close the airport. We certainly realize it's a vital part of our community, and we just would like to keep, I think a lot of people would just like to keep it the way it is. Another thing is, I think it was Mr. Quinn who was talking about pilots being on top of their game, and with the shorter runway, it seemed like they had to try harder. And I think we all want pilots to be on top of their game no matter what. And I just wanted to throw that into the mix so that we focus more on the warrant articles. All right, thank you so much for your time.
Very good. Thank you. Appreciate that. I have a Renee Haas, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yeah, thanks. I'll try to, skip over the points that have already been made. Obviously, the opinion is that the article is illegal. That's been explained. Just a few numbers around some of these things. The penalties from the federal government, and amounts to be reclaimed are, actually potentially over $10 million, that has been granted to the airport in the last 20 years. And the grant assurances are, last for 20 years. The future grants to the airport would certainly, in the case of conflict, such as this article is proposing, those future grants would be cut off immediately. And that forces Chatham taxpayers to pay the full cost of infrastructure maintenance. In reality, this means that the airport would just die from a lack of funding. Chatham taxpayers could not be expected to pay the full costs of maintaining an airport. And of course, they would forego, very substantial grants that are planned. The bilateral infrastructure law that was, passed bilaterally into Congress provides for Chatham receiving $800,000 in grants, 100% grants, I should add, for infrastructure repairs and improvements. Now, that's not a direct cost to the town of Chatham, but it's a foregone opportunity, which means that if you want to keep the airport maintained, it's money that the Chatham taxpayers would have to pay. The article does effectively force, as has been noted, Chatham to litigate with federal state authorities. And it's been pointed out the cost of the litigation really, it has no upper bound. I mean, I know Andy had mentioned it's a black hole. It's basically writing a blank check. It's very interesting, how we have numbers associated with capital articles. This is just a pure blank check, and as has been noted, would be a financial disaster. It should also be noted, it hasn't been mentioned, that the dispute is not just with the federal government, but our grant assurances are with the federal and Mass DOT. And Mass DOT, in the case of such conflicts, would not just withhold funding for the airport, but is liable to withhold funding for necessary improvements and repairs to state highways, Route 6, Route 28. So this could morph into something much wider and extremely costly to the town.
30 seconds, please.
What?
30 seconds, please.
Okay, sure. I just want to say that technically displacing the runway threshold is a very, very bad idea. It just makes perfect sense that it's going to be more dangerous, not only for pilots, but people on the ground, to have to stop 800 feet shorter than what they do today. And I appreciate your time, Chairman. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. I have a Michael Cortese, perhaps. Michael, are you there?
Yes. Good afternoon. How are you?
Pretty good. Thank you. How are you?
Excellent. Excellent. Trying to get my self-centered in the picture here. I'm an airport commission member and a pilot. And I'm coming to you today as a resident of the town underneath the traffic pattern and a pilot. A lot has been said about the financial aspects. Today, I'm going to just quickly, briefly touch on the safety aspects. And a couple corrections I had. Mr. Fulton had mentioned the incident in P-Town as a turboprop aircraft. It actually wasn't. It was a Cape Air twin piston 402. And it was speculating that it was overrun. We have to wait for the FAA and the full report to come out on that. I also don't know if it was corrected, and I know there are two articles out, but the first draft had the airport address incorrect. So that was one other comment I wanted to make. As far as the safety aspects in landing on an airport with a displaced threshold, I'm a pilot based at Chatham. I have an aircraft at Chatham. Last August, I landed in a small island in Ohio on Lake Erie that had a displaced threshold. And both my wife and I said, wow, it was the same length as runway, and the displaced threshold was the same length as it was here that's being proposed. And I said, wow, we landed, but that felt a lot shorter. What I pulled out of that, and I've landed at displaced thresholds in the past, is that in reality, what you are forcing the pilot to do is land farther down the runway. And that doesn't protect the intended, I believe, intended runway protection zone of the people in front of the runway. It really puts at risk the people on the far end of the runway, because that's where you have to, your safety mount is having excess runway in front of you to land and slow down. When you displace the threshold and you are forced to land a third of the way down the runway, which is normally what we do anyways, your process of landing in there usually puts you, if not spot on, a little bit farther than you normally would. This is especially important for transient aircraft, which we get a lot of in the summer, and that's when most of the traffic is. Not necessarily based aircraft owners or people who visit the Chatham Airport regularly as they know the airport and the area. That's basically all I had wanted to touch on today. Thank you for your time.
Very good. Thank you for your comments. Then the last one I have is simply identified as guest in parentheses. So if you happen to be guest in parentheses,
Elaine
it's your
Gibbs.
turn. I'm sorry.
It's Elaine Gibbs.
Good afternoon. Your turn.
Okay, I'll make it quick. I agree with all the speakers so far in terms of the safety. But one thing that hasn't come up, by displacing the thresholds, the FAA makes clear that in an ideal world, there should be no human congregation within a runway protection zone because it's not safe for people on the ground. By artificially displacing that threshold and moving it back, that would allow for increased development within the existing RPZ. And that is the plan. And whether it's intended or unintended, the idea that we would actually markedly increase the density, because that's the plan of the planning board, within the existing RPZ would put even more people at risk on the ground. And if we're really concerned about safety, making an artificial adjustment that if I were a pilot and I had the runway, I'd use it, so that the risk is still there. And so I would agree that there may be other ways to get around this, but to increase density within the RPZ is not a good thing, and it puts more people at risk, pilots and people on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you. I come back to Mr. Fulton, please.
Thank you very much. I wasn't going to speak anymore, but I just wanted to mention and I'm so very sorry that Tom Gagan isn't here today because he is the expert on this. But I believe that very respectfully that Mrs. Gibbs is mistaken, that when you displace a threshold, you do change the measurement of the RPZ and you do pull it back. It will not pull it back entirely onto airport property, but it will pull it back to the point that every single home will no longer be in the RPZ. And that's all I wanted to say. And I thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you. All right. Further comments or questions, please, from the general public. If not, I'm going to go back to the Finance Committee for any final questions. All right. Seeing none, Finance Committee members, any further questions for any of our speakers? Otherwise, I will take, oh, sorry, was that somebody? Mr. Fulton, could I get you to mute your microphone, please?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No worries, just getting a little feedback here.
Andy's
Joanne,
hand is up.
Andy, please.
Mr. Chairman, I think you're probably ready for it. I move that we recommend approval of this article.
Thank you. Sorry, just to be clear, you recommend to move to approve the article, Andy?
That we recommend approval of this article.
All right. Is there a second to recommend approval of the article?
Second.
All right. So to be clear, this is to vote in favor of adopting Article 56, the displaced threshold. Roll call, Barbara.
No.
Joanne.
No.
Andy.
No.
I got you, Joanne. Thank you. Andy was a no.
Yep.
Tommy Doan.
No.
John Whalen.
No.
John Papalardo. No. Thank you, John. And the chair is a no. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 0 to 7. Please on Article 56. All right, we're going to go please now to Article 57. Restricting landing abilities to aircraft that are in Airplane Design Group 1. Mr. Fulton, I believe you're going to speak to this.
Thank you very much. It's been a little frustrating to listen for over an hour to comments directed at these articles, plural. And I have resisted the temptation to jump in with respect to my article. And when I refer to my article, I'm talking about Article 57. I am the author of this article. Believe me, this article is not designed to close the airport. It's designed to make the airport safer and to keep the airport open as a result of it. Secondly, I have researched this. Oh, by the way, I also am a land use lawyer, a 45-year tenure. 6 times, I can count, 6 times the courts in this country, all federal courts except one being the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts, took up the issue of whether a local airport owner or municipality could restrict the use of land from being used by particular aircraft, and 6 times they have ruled in favor of the local bylaw. And that's because it is a bylaw dealing with the use of land, which is a uniquely local function. Second, another thing I want to say, this is not a financial black hole. In the first instance, this bylaw, if it passes, will go to the Attorney General's office, where all municipal bylaws go after they're passed, and she will make a determination of whether this bylaw is legal or illegal in the first instance. As I say, I believe it is lawful. Not only that, but I believe that she's going to find that it's lawful, because from what I've read from the municipal law unit, the Attorney General is extremely supportive of runway protection zones. 2 years ago, she disapproved a bylaw from a town that would have allowed development in a runway protection zone. And she said, no way. Runway protection zones have to be kept safe and free of incompatible objects. But if perchance she says, no, I don't think this is a lawful bylaw, this bylaw calls for the institution of a very short procedure. It doesn't spell out, but it's under Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 249, Section 4. It's a certiorari proceeding where the issue is then presented either to the Superior Court or directly to the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts. It's typically presented on a set of stipulated, agreed upon facts, since there's no dispute of the facts. You know, on May such and such, 22, the town of Chatham adopted a bylaw. The bylaw read this. The Attorney General said it's not legal. The question before the court is it legal or illegal? It's not going to, it takes a couple of hours. I, by the way, have offered my legal services to the town of Chatham on a pro hac vice basis, because I'm not admitted in Massachusetts, but a Massachusetts lawyer can carry my briefcase and get me admitted pro hac vice, so I could present the legal arguments to the court as to why it was legal. So this is not, and I've offered those services gratis. So this is not going to be the legal aspects of determining the legality of this bylaw is not going to be a black hole by any means. I heard a lot talk about the economic impact. By the way, nobody, not even the Board of Selectmen, has intimated that if this bylaw passes, the airport is going to be less safe. It can only be more safe if you eliminate a particular class of airplane from landing here, because fewer airplanes will land here then. The only argument having been made by the Board of Selectmen is it's illegal. Well, I'm not as confident as the lawyers for the town are that it is illegal. In fact, I have a great deal of precedent that indicates to me that it's quite legal. But again, the Attorney General will be making that decision in the first instance. And in the second instance, a judge is going to review the cases about which I speak, and he will decide. In July of 2020, I was in the town hall meeting for a couple of hours with Pete Kokolas and with Corey Metters. And my friend Corey Metters said, quite interestingly, I don't know what the big deal is about these big airplanes having to land in Hyannis, which is a safer airport, and drive for 15 minutes to come to Chatham. And then he said, Chatham is going to be no less of a summer destination if that has to take place. And I agree with him completely. This is not going to destroy a single job. It's not going to detract from business. Chatham is going to be the same wonderful tourist destination it's always been if the big airplanes have to land in Hyannis rather than at the Chatham airport. By the way, for my friend Mike Cortese, I believe a Cessna 402, which crashed in P-Town, is indeed a turboprop. And I have the specs here, but we can talk about that later.
That might be a good idea. Is there anything further you'd like to speak to specifically, Mr.
No,
Fulton,
but
with respect to
I'd like
Airplane
to
Design Group 1 and the proposed limitations on their activity?
No, I just want to say, by the way, Design Group 1 is an aircraft up to, but not exceeding a 49-foot wingspan. So those planes were not going to be touched by this bylaw. It's just the bigger ones. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Very good. Thank you for that. So to the committee then first, please. Questions for Mr. Fulton on proposed Article 57, the restriction on aircraft only those in Airplane Design Group 1. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody in the committee. That's curious. All right. So in that instance, then, Mr. Harrison, can I just get you to offer the perspective? There's Mr. Seldorf, not yet. Mr.
I'm here.
Seldorf. So, Mr. Harrison, can I just get you, as we did with respect to 56, just to provide a perspective for the benefit of the committee from that of the Airport Commission, please?
Sure.
Including, if you wish, either of your colleagues or consultants or however we're characterizing them.
Right. Mr. Makarios was called away a minute ago, and I have texted him. He may come back. Of course, I don't think he heard what Mr. Fulton had to say, unfortunately, but I'm going to just fall back on the comments that were made by Mr. Makarios's firm, attorney David Mackey, in the letter that he wrote at my request regarding the proposed petition articles. And he commented on this particular proposal, the ADG 1 proposal, on page 1 of his letter, and I would just defer to what he said there. This proposal is also inconsistent with federal law, and just because the Pilatus airplane in particular does not necessarily fall into design group 1 because of wingspan, it does not necessarily preclude it from landing at Chatham Airport, nor does it make Chatham Airport or that airplane any less safe. And I would defer to Mr. Karen for comments regarding specifics on that. And I think he's still on the line, and you can certainly bring him into the conversation at your
No, that's fine, Mr. Harrison. If you think that Mr. Karen has something to say, Mr. Karen, the floor is yours for the time being.
Okay, well, good evening, good afternoon, and thank you again for letting me weigh in on this article as well. So I'll just a couple more basic facts. So the airport receives federal funding assistance, and as a result, they are contractually obligated to the grant assurances, which I've heard you've heard mentioned several times by many of the speakers. And those grant assurances are imposed by the Federal Aviation Administration. And so part of these grant assurances the town of Chatham is bounded by. This includes the airport's obligation, and I quote, to make the airport available as a public use airport on reasonable terms and conditions and without unjust discrimination to all types, kinds, and classes of aeronautical activities. So the article as written insinuates that there is a safety issue at Chatham by the use of aircraft outside of the design aircraft group. So that type of aircraft outside of A1. And please note that this review of such approval, or note that the review and approval of such limitations at an airport falls under the purview of the Federal Aviation Administration and FAA Flight Standards Team. So I again would ask why the article is ignoring the basic requirement to involve the Federal Aviation Administration and have them evaluate the merits of limiting certain types of aircraft at Chatham. Instead, this article is asking the town to enforce a bylaw through the use of police officers, town manager, or his or her designee or other individuals employed by the town on something that the town doesn't even have authority over, or simply put, if they just worked with the Federal Aviation Administration, it's possible that they may agree that Type 2 aircraft are unsafe to land at Chatham Airport, and there could be something that is done. So again, the article is asking the town to blindly support and engage in civil proceedings without having once coordinated with the Federal Aviation Administration to analyze and endorse the purported safety rationale behind the article. And I'll leave it at that.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Karen. So I come back to members of the committee if there are questions. The only observation I'll make is that I certainly remember fond memories as a kid of watching my father fly into Chatham on a DC-3. I'm not sure what design group that's in, but it sure was fun as a kid. Seeing no questions from the committee, I do see Mr. Seldorf, you had your hand up first a couple of minutes ago, please.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, Joanne, I see him there. Joanne Sprague, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, throughout this conversation, I keep hearing a term that I'm not familiar with, and it's the Pilatus Aircraft. Can someone describe why that's continuously referred to and what is its importance or significance in this conversation?
Mr. Harrison, can you field that ball for us, please?
Sure. The Pilatus aircraft is a charter aircraft that or personally owned aircraft that flies into Chatham relatively often, bringing people on vacation or bringing people to their residences. And it is a turboprop. It's not a small Cessna. It's a single engine turboprop. Holds, I think, 6 to 8 passengers. I could be wrong on that, maybe more. It depends on the configuration of the airplane and how much fuel it has and so on. But I don't know if I don't have specific specs on the airplane myself, but perhaps there are others here who could talk to that if you need further information. But the airplane comes in last year. I think it came in about a little over 500 times.
You good, Joanne? Okay, thank you. So
yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
You're
Going back then we'll turn this open to the public, please. And again, Mr. Seldorf, you had your hand up first, please.
Thank you. I am an owner, so I'm happy to answer any questions about its size and specifications. It is 54 feet wingspan, which is why it would be outside of the Category 1 or Class 1 definition Mr. Fulton proposes. It's about 48 feet long. It's a single engine. It has.
So, Mr. Seldorf, I think you're in a bad zone. So what I'm going to do, Mr. Seldorf, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
All right, we can't hear you very well. So what I'm going to do is move on to some others who have their hands up. If you get a clear, I'm going to put your hand down. If you get a clear zone with, 4 bars, whatever, stick your hand back up again and I'll work you in.
Thank you, sorry.
All right, so I go then please to Mr. Fulton.
Thank you. I just want to speak briefly to a couple of things that Mr. Karen told us. By the way, the enforcement provision that talks about the police and that's cut and paste from the existing bylaws. That's exactly how all bylaws in Chatham are enforced. If you ride a bicycle on a sidewalk in the village of Chatham against that bylaw, that's how that bylaw is enforced. So that's no different. Secondly, Mr. Karen talked, I think he quoted a grant assurance and talked about the requirement to make the airport available to all types of airplanes without unjust discrimination. All 6 cases that have taken up the issue have held it was not unjust discrimination. The Gustafson case, which is a federal court case from the 6th Circuit Court of Appeals, says, and I quote, control over ground space, the legislative history of the act indicates, is a matter of local control rather than in the category of regulation of aircraft in flight, which is a matter of preemptive federal control. So yes, the local bylaw, because it controls what planes can use land, that takes precedence, and all the cases have said that. I just, let's let the Attorney General tell us if those 6 cases are right or if they're wrong. I doubt that she'll say they're wrong, since one of the 6 cases the United States Supreme Court looked at and actually denied certiorari because they found that the issue had been correctly decided. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. I see Mr. Seldorf has his hand back up again, so let's see if we can take advantage of his current zone. Mr. Seldorf.
Thank you, sir, and I'll keep my video off to minimize the bandwidth. Again, I'd be happy to answer questions about the Pilatus because I own one. It's a misunderstanding because of the over 2,000 Pilatuses that have been produced. Only probably less than 200 are actually in charter operation. They just happen to be very active in our area because it's a perfectly suited plane for the mission that flies to and from Chatham. On the DC-3, by the way, sir, it's 93-foot wingspan. It would be a Category 3 aircraft.
Well,
it's how the airport was designed. It was designed.
It was quite a sight to see when they would come in. So thank you for that.
Of a Category 3 airport. So, yeah. So the point here is this proposal is not for safety, but for the restriction of the use of the airport, and that's why I'm against it. By the way, a Class 1 plane could land at the airport, such as a Learjet 24 or a Cessna Citation 1, Mustang 1 or 2, because all 3 of those jets, all twin engine, have wingspans that are less than 49 feet. So the proposal here is really a bit distorted for what its purpose is. Its purpose is not safety. Its purpose is restriction of the airport. And the way it's crafted isn't actually going to achieve an improvement in some ways, except to discriminate against a specific couple of aircraft types that actually, from a performance standpoint, are better than many of the airplanes that are landing, that are based in Chatham as we speak. So this is really first and foremost an issue of, do we want to restrict the use of the airport beyond what is already been safely able to do? And that is why the Finance Committee should fact that it will be contested and cost money to resolve. Thank you.
Stephen, you're muted, I think.
Still a little rusty, Andy. Thank you. Sorry, everybody. Mr. Haas, I think your hand's up next, please.
Thank you, Chairman Daniel. Yeah, just a few comments. First of all, really, because of the opinions of illegality, it's clear that this article could snowball into protracted litigation, despite what Mr. Fulton says. And again, the article provides for no limit in the cost, and so we have the same situation with a black hole with no upper bound on the costs incurred. It's been mentioned that the safety concerns are completely unfounded, and I just want to add that, these larger aircraft, and the Pilatus is one example, they are typically one of the most safe aircraft to utilize Chatham Airport. They typically have the most sophisticated and advanced safety equipment on board, and provided that they are rated to land within the runway that we have, they are extremely safe. And there's been never any incidences of these larger aircraft, having an accident at Chatham. It's also, noteworthy. The chairman has pointed out the DC-3. I have some pictures of Chatham Airport in the 1960s, with DC-3 aircraft, and they, as stated, had a wingspan of 90 feet, could carry 16 passengers, and they were much larger, much heavier, and much noisier than the Pilatus, which appears to be the significant target of this particular article. It should be pointed out that the twin-engine Beech Baron, has a higher noise profile and is within a Category 1. Mr. Seldorf pointed out that there are jets in Category 1 that are certainly louder, than the Pilatus. And it's obvious that the real issue here is that those who favor adopting this article are interpreting the FAA guidelines just to support their personal interest in eliminating the noise of, in particular, the Pilatus aircraft, which is very discriminatory. They're attempting to take control of the airport to satisfy a personal agenda, very limited, personal agenda. But as pointed out by Mr. Karen, the FAA, not airport neighbors, are the final arbiter of all safety issues at Chatham Airport, including what types of aircraft can be operated.
30 seconds,
management should not be involved in nor pay the expenses for such a dispute, as it really has no jurisdiction in the safety matters related to the airport. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Very good, thank you. Ms. Burke,
Mr.
please.
Chairman, may I interrupt briefly?
Is it germane to what we're just?
Yeah, our Mr.
Sure,
Makarios is back online, and he indicated to me that he had a comment.
Okay, let me just get through with Ms. Burke, and then we've got Hart and you. So let me please, just as courtesy to Ms. Burke, who's been waiting, let me get to her, and then we'll put Mr. Makarios in. So Ms. Burke, please.
Thank you, Jan Burke. You hear me all right?
Yes, please. Yes, we can.
On Article 57, just a couple of comments, some drafting problems with it as well. There are no definitional sections. It talks about adding a bylaw. Doesn't say whether it's a zoning bylaw or a general bylaw. And it just uses the words bylaw in two different places. It's of course a zoning bylaw, which of course it may be, because it talks in the second line about land use. And if it's a zoning bylaw, has it had a hearing before the planning board as required? I don't know the answer to that. And will this require a 2/3 vote at town meeting to adopt, or are we going to go general bylaw with this? It's generally not recommended that land use bylaws be in the general bylaws of a town, because you lose the protection and enforcement under Chapter 40A, the Zoning Enabling Act. So this is, in my view, again, another poorly crafted document that is not ready for prime time. Another part of it is it has no exception language for emergency medical services, environmental use airport, airplanes such as NOAA, military, law enforcement, and the like. It is a rigid bylaw that just, it's my way or the highway. This is a terrible bylaw. Anyway, just from a drafting and a structural standpoint, I won't have any other comments. I think everybody else has weighed in on the important points of how, yeah, I mean, the proponent already has us at the Supreme Court with a hearing before the Supreme Court and everything else on these things. So I think it goes without saying, this brings us into another black hole for litigation, and we should just on that alone turn this bylaw down. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Attorney Makarios, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think that actually this is an opportune time to mention this because Jan Burke touched on this. The reason I wanted to comment, or Mr. Harrison asked me to comment, is I understand that some of the comments about the Attorney General's office would review this and simply could be left to them. Excuse me. 2 comments. First of all, because this involves aeronautics, it would be the Attorney General's office, but would also need sign off from the Mass Division of Aeronautics of the Mass DOT under Chapter 90. And there's been a couple of times in this, and I understand it happened again in today's presentation, that the Roma versus Rockport case was mentioned. Roma does stand for the proposition that towns may regulate local land use, but it very explicitly in a footnote, Justice Gantz noted that that it does not, the case is not intended to address airports. It only addresses what's called a private restricted landing area, which, for lack of a better analogy, is the equivalent of landing in one's backyard. It's sort of the ability to land one's plane on one's own property. It does not address a public airport. Those still require approval by MassDOT, and all of those other issues come into play. And it is true that while some of the federal cases have allowed for management of ground congestion, the courts have also been very careful not to allow ground congestion to intrude into the types of aircraft and the safety of aircraft before and after they land. And there's just as, if not more so, cases on that point, and much more recent cases than some of the ones that have been cited to you. And so I would just say that if the attorney, I do not agree that with the conclusion that the Attorney General's office is likely to find this not preempted. In our experience as aviation counsel, this is actually very clearly preempted. In fact, we used to do these kind of reviews for the MassDOT Aeronautics Commission, and this one will be clearly preempted.
All right, thank you for that, Attorney Makarios. Mr. Fulton.
Yes. Am I muted? Let me see.
No, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. You know, I think we should let the Attorney General do her job and not take bets on what she's going to do. By the way, in response to Ms. Burke, there are zoning bylaws that are land use bylaws, and there are land use bylaws that are not zoning bylaws. The bylaw in the town of Chatham that doesn't allow bicycles to be ridden on sidewalks is a land use bylaw. And this is a general bylaw, much of the same ilk. To Attorney Makarios, yes, you and I have read the Roma 3 case probably more than any 2 people attending this meeting today. And and I'm very familiar with footnote 9, but the other federal cases that Chief Justice Gantz cited, in many instances did deal with public airports and landing sites. So I think when you go through it, you're going to find, well, you're going to have to run the same test that he ran through to find whether there's preemption or not. And I think they're going to ultimately find no preemption, and you think that they will. And, you know, the Attorney General is going to tell us what she thinks. By the way, this bylaw will never bar emergency medical services. Nobody's going to bring emergency medical services in a Type 2 airplane. It's either going to come in by helicopter, which is unaffected by this, or it's going to come in a smaller airplane to airlift somebody out of here. If for any reason they don't bring in a helicopter, which is the aircraft of choice in emergency medical services. Yeah, I think that about covers it.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Fulton. Andy, your hands up, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's time that, I made a motion to recommend approval of this article.
All right, let me just see if there are any further questions from the Finance Committee. If not, we have a motion to recommend approval of Article 57, restriction to landings of ADG-1 airplanes. We need a second.
Second.
Mr. Doan, thank you. So roll call. In favor, Barbara?
No.
Joanne, please.
No.
Thank you. Andy?
No.
Tommy?
No.
John Whalen?
No.
John Papalardo?
No.
And the chair votes no. 0-7 on Article 57. I'd like to thank everybody, please, for their engagement on these two topics. We're now going to move on, please, to Article 4, current year budget adjustments and transfers. Alex, my screen has just grown enormously large, so I can only see a fraction of the actual screen. I'll just keep my eyes on who's got their hands raised.
Okay.
And turn it over to you for Article 4, please.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, Article 4 is the current year budget adjustments and transfers. In your packet, I supplied the report that we gave to the Select Board back on March 22nd. And while we have no budget adjustments for the general fund budget, we're requesting a transfer from free cash into several special revenue funds that have deficit balances, the largest of which is our COVID-19 FEMA reimbursement request account. So there's three accounts that we're looking to transfer money into. One is the Winter Rapid Recovery Program. This was a grant back in FY14 and FY15, which town received a total of $101,544. Unfortunately, we expended $53,015.46 and $58,918 the subsequent year, resulting in a deficit of $10,389.49. As you might recall, there was a transition with the DPW directors at the time, and there was probably some confusion there. So we're asking to transfer $10,389.49 from free cash into the Winter Rapid Recovery Program. There's also a small deficit in the Morris Island U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services grant, $4,614.54, which was design costs related to parking along the Morris Island Road, and that project never moved forward. So we're looking to fund that deficit as well. The largest deficit is we're waiting reimbursement for some of the FEMA, some of the COVID-19 related expenditures that we had. To date, we've expended almost $860,000 relating to the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We have received just under $395,000 to date. We expect more funds to come in. However, we don't expect those to come in before the close of the fiscal year. If we don't receive those in the close of the fiscal year, when free cash is certified, it will be reduced by the amount of the deficit of $466,114 plus the other two deficits. So by using free cash to fund the deficit, when the funds are received, if and when the funds are received in future years, they'll close to free cash, replenishing that amount. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, Andy, I see you've got your hand up, please.
Alex, in the Morris Island Fish and Wildlife Grant, if the project didn't go forward, why did we spend money?
That was for the design and feasibility study at the very beginning, so there was no construction cost associated with that. Had the construction costs moved forward, then seeking reimbursement, those costs would be funded and reimbursed. But because the project didn't go forward, those were not reimbursable.
So the terms of the grant from Fish and Wildlife was we don't get reimbursed unless the project goes forward.
Looking back at that, that's what it appears, yes.
Aha. Hope we don't fall into that trap too many times.
Exactly.
Yeah, usually we don't.
Thank you.
Barbara, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Alex, one of my questions was along the same lines. Why, I mean, clearly we wanted to go forward with it or we wouldn't have spent that money. Why did we decide not to?
I don't recall whether what the reason was not moving forward. I just looked back and it did not move forward. And the parking, it was widening and straightening the road on Morris Island Road. And I think that there was some opposition to that at the time, but I would have to go back and review the notes why it didn't move forward.
Thanks. I think one of the things that we've been concerned about is that we seem to spend an awful lot of money exploring things that we never end up doing. And, it's one thing if we, if our exploration decides that it was a bad idea, let's not pursue it. For instance, like the Kroll Road project. But, a lot of times like this, it seems like a small amount of money, but it adds up. So I think that's something that this committee is going to start looking at a little more closely. And my second one is, could you just please remind me what the Winter Rapid Recovery Program was?
That was to have road repairs around town due to the freeze and thaw, I think, from the temperature changes. So it was to repave certain areas of different roadways. And again, looking back, we did expend $53,000 in one year and then $58,000 in another year. And I said, I think it, with the changes in the DPW department, that it was overexpended in the second year, but the repairs were made.
Okay, thanks, Alex.
Joanne, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Alex, you mentioned above these staff recommendations that the balance in free cash, if all articles are approved at town meeting, will be $2,522,850. Is at this date, is that true if everything that we've said in these articles is going to be taken from free cash? This will be our balance at the end of the fiscal year of free cash?
Okay, no, actually it has changed because the Eldridge Garage project came in a little higher than what I had programmed. So the balance in free cash, if everything is approved, and that includes prior year bills, these articles, capital, dredging, Mill Hill, Old Commerce Road Training Field, the Retirement Trust Fund, Eldridge Garage, dredging, matching funds, the Mill Hill restoration account, and the feasibility for the swim club. The balance will be $2,269,063.35.
Thank you, Alex. I appreciate it. Thank you,
Alex,
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Joanne. Alex, just a couple questions, please. You just made reference to a shift in the Eldridge Garage property improvement price tag. We were holding 1.495 million. What's the number now?
No, that is the correct number. I think when I had done my agenda report, I had a different number in there.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Two, I understand it's 7, maybe even 8 years old at this point in time, but does the discrepancy in the winter rapid recovery program suggest any weakness that needs to be corrected or revisited?
Looking back on that, yes, I think that we've already addressed that, as we have not had deficits in special revenue funds. Going forward, we're checking all those all the time.
Okay, good. Lastly, with respect to the COVID-19 FEMA reimbursement, mine is it ultimately a question of timing? If
That
both these
often
things
happens.
land to free cash one way or the other, either now or then?
That's correct. Some items, will not qualify under FEMA, but may still qualify under a different program. I just received something on that yesterday. But again, if we use free cash now and we get a reimbursement in the future, that will close to miscellaneous income and replenish free cash.
Right. And if we don't do this?
If we don't do this, then the balance of free cash will be reduced by this amount, because the Department of Revenue any deficits that remain, the Department of Revenue sort of takes that amount out of free cash. So again, free cash will be certified at an amount less. So it's basically, it's almost a wash.
Well, that's
so to speak.
It's exactly
And-
a wash. I'm just wondering why we're doing it, but other than timing.
Yeah, and as far as the timing, I think 2 years ago, we received our final reimbursement from Superstorm Sandy.
Okay,
So-
well, I understand wanting to close it out. I'm not sure that it's a difference with a distinction, but that's okay. Further questions from the committee on proposed Article 4? If not, I'll take a motion to adopt.
I'll move it.
Thank you,
I'll
Barbara.
second it.
Thank you, John. In favor, Barbara?
Yes.
Joanne?
Yes.
Thank you. Andy?
Yes.
Tommy Doan?
Yes.
John Whalen?
Yes.
John Papalardo?
Yes.
And the chair says yes, 7-0, reversing the recent trend.
Thank you.
All right. So we have 13 minutes left. We have, Alex, help me out with this one for a little bit, because we received this morning a sort of a semi-emergency request, as I would characterize it, for a draw on the Finance Committee Reserve Fund. It is not calendared specifically on our agenda, but I don't want to go to jail. But I think it's important enough that it's something that we need to think about. Alex, have you got some guidance on whether I'm going to go to jail?
Yeah, I did just send that out to the committee because, as noted, I just received this request this morning. So there was not time to, put it on the agenda. I would think that, and I have to go back to the open meeting law, but it was, there was no way that we could foresee this coming to properly notice the public on this.
Right. All right, well, I guess I'll take my chances, but we'll do that in a second. So let's see if we can't finish up. I want to kind of move around here for the sake of just trying to get a couple things done.
Okay.
Focus on the Chatham Health and Swim Club, of which there are 2 articles, Article 30, the feasibility study, and Article 58, the citizen petitioned article that we seek to acquire the property. Alex, can you start us, please, on Article 30?
Yes, actually, if I can, I'm going to do the citizens petition, because that was the genesis for
Sure.
the
That's a fair point.
feasibility study. So the select board received a citizens petition that the Chatham purchased the Chatham Health and Swim Club, and it was signed. The petition was signed by over 212 citizens of the town. So again, it was a lot of support for this petition. The select board, when they heard this, had some concerns about the Chatham Health and Swim Club, because they have not had a chance to, review the property. And again, speaking as a feasibility study, they felt that a feasibility study on the reuse and the possible purchase would be the prudent manner before deciding to enter into a purchase and sale agreement or even make an offer on the property. Again, just due diligence is probably the best way to move forward when you're purchasing a piece of property or any large purchase. And I believe that the petitioner was in support of that, to have a feasibility study on the reuse of the Chatham Swim Club. So the select board voted to take $50,000 from free cash, again, one of the changes in free cash, but it's noted in that balance that I just mentioned. So $50,000 for feasibility study and evaluation of the Health and Swim Club in order for the select board to have sufficient information to determine the cost benefits if the town were to purchase the property.
Okay, questions for Alex then, please, on Article 58, the prospective purchase of the Health and Swim Club. All right, none from the committee. Are there any questions or comments from our guests and visitors? Barbara, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alex, will this feasibility study take into consideration not only the condition of the building, but also the cost going forward to the town, such as the additional staffing that will be needed?
Yes, that's the way it's worded, to determine the cost benefit to the town. So if we were to acquire the property, and I'm sure that that is included in that, in the study as well.
Oh, great. Okay, thanks.
All right, further questions from the committee, if any? If not, I'll take a motion to adopt whether Article 58, whether Chatham should purchase the Chatham Health and Swim Club.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Andy.
Mr. Chair, is this the purchase or is this the feasibility study?
We can do that. I'm sorry, you're right. You started with a purchase, so
Right.
Why don't we finish the purchase?
Okay.
Again,
Just making sure it's clear.
Yep. Thank you. To be clear to the committee, it's for Article 58, the purchase of the swim club. Let me just revisit. We have a motion and a second. Any questions for Alex relative to it? John Whalen, please.
Mr. Chairman, I really don't feel comfortable voting for or against this article without the results of the feasibility study. I might suggest that we delay a vote on this. Now, it may mean that it can't go to this town meeting, but voting on something without any idea what the feasibility study will determine is really not something I'm comfortable doing.
Well, I understand, and I think some of that may have been reflected in the vote at the select board as well, which is why it ended up the way it did. I think we do have a petitioned article. We do have the obligation to reflect our recommendation to town meeting for it. So I can't obviously tell you how to vote, John, but perhaps you might consider an abstention if you're not comfortable one way or the other. But we do, unless I'm missing something, Alex, we've got a approved petition article that we need to weigh in on for the benefit of town meeting.
Correct. The petition articles move forward to town meeting regardless of the select board vote. The select board voted to approve this by a vote of 1 in favor, 3 opposed, and 1 abstention.
So I acknowledge your quandary, John, but I think we need to move forward. So we have a motion and a second. Assuming there are no further questions, I'll call the roll. All right, no questions. Barbara?
No.
Joanne?
No.
Andy?
No.
Tommy?
No.
John Whalen?
Abstain.
Thank you. John Papalardo?
No.
And the chair says no. So 0, 6, 1 on Article 58. All right, so now we'll turn to Article 30, which is the feasibility study for $50,000. Alex, anything further you'd like to say about that?
Here to answer any questions. I think, again, this is for the feasibility study to see if the town should purchase it, which then if the recommendation by the select board is to purchase this, that would be a future town meeting vote.
All right, questions for Alex, if any?
Well, parenthetically, I mean, this will be an interesting initial test of the town's desire to pursue the health club at all. Right.
Right. Agreed. And perhaps even the finance committee.
Correct.
So, any questions from the committee? Any questions or observations from the guests? If not, I'll take a motion to adopt Article 30, feasibility study on the reuse of the Chatham Health and Swim Club, please. Love it.
So
All
moved.
right. Well, we got a lot of those. So I think I heard Andy and Tommy. Barbara,
Yes.
Joanne,
Yes.
Andy,
Yes.
Tommy,
Yes.
John Whalen,
Yes.
John Papalardo.
Yes.
Chairman votes no. So we have
1-6.
6-1. All right. Then I think at the risk of perhaps going into the dock, I'm going to suggest that we look at the request for the reserve fund transfer, which again I would characterize, having read it, as something of potentially extreme public safety consequence. Certainly public safety import. Alex, can you walk us through the request for a transfer from the Finance Committee Reserve Fund, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this morning, Dr. Duncanson came up. There's Dr. Duncanson. I will let Bob speak to this, but I'll just introduce. This request came in that the port engine on the 27-foot Harbor Master's boat has failed. And again, this is not due to not taking care of the engine. It was routinely maintained. So it just failed. It's a 12-year-old engine. I think you have a copy of the email that was sent by the Harbor Master, Stuart Smith, to Dr. Duncanson and myself. So again, this is, it's one of two engines on the boat. If you have a boat with two engines, it's very difficult to operate with just one engine as it sort of crabs across the water. It doesn't really move straight. But again, this is to look to a reserve fund transfer of about, I think, $60,000 to fund the purchase of the engines. There's only two available. It was very difficult to find, but Bob, I'll turn this over to you for more detail. I think you could speak to this better than I can.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Yeah, if you've seen the Harbor Master's email, just to give you a little context, these engines were not purchased. These engines were not purchased new when the 27-footer was purchased. We basically purchased the hull, and then we took the engines off the prior boat that was being replaced. And so that's why one of the engines was a 2010, the other one was a 2015. So they already had a fair number of hours on them when they were put on the new hull. And then subsequently, the port engine has failed for whatever reason. I can assure you it's not lack of maintenance. The Harbor Master's office is diligent about maintaining their equipment, sometimes to a fault. But I think it's just a reflection of, 12-year-old engine gets a lot of heavy use year round in, a somewhat unforgiving environment around here, where we have a lot of shallow areas that, even though you try not to get into them, sometimes you do. So when it failed, the Harbor Master's office immediately embarked on trying to find a replacement. After making phone calls basically all around the country, they found two similar engines in Florida, in Fort Myers. Those are apparently the only two 300 horsepower Yamahas that are available anywhere in the country right now for sale. Along with supply chain shortages and the rise in boating of the last 2.5 years with COVID, trying to find any boat related material right now is extremely difficult. So they were able to locate these two Yamahas in Florida. We did just get in the price quote from the dealer at $58,540. And that includes a 1% discount and then $300 an engine to basically ship them up here to Massachusetts. And then once they get up here, there will be a further cost of about $2,100 to get them to a local marina, get the old engines off, get the new ones installed properly. There's two reasons why we're really trying to stick with the same engines that we have now. Obviously, if we go to a different manufacturer, it will require all new wiring harnesses and other changes to the boat to make a different manufacturer's engine work. Plus, we have been trying to standardize on Yamahas on a number of the other Harbor Master boats so that if needed, we could basically swap engines back and forth. One of the reasons for purchasing, or not one of the reasons, but a reason for purchasing 2 engines brand new, we would then take the starboard engine that we currently have that is still running and basically put that in as a reserve, either for this boat or one of the other boats that also has a 300 Yamaha on it. So we felt that gives us the most flexibility going forward. It meets the immediate needs. It gets this boat back in the water quickly. Because I'm not sure if the Harbor Master indicated it, but the Coast Guard's boats, the 45s, are currently down. So right now, the Harbor Master is the only on-water asset we have if anybody gets in trouble. So they have relaunched one of their other boats, moved that around so it's available. But obviously, it's not as capable as the 27. That's why we'd really like to get this addressed as quickly as we can and notify the folks in Florida that yes, we will take those engines before they turn around and sell them to somebody else. So with that, I will try to answer any questions.
Very good. Thank you, Bob. Questions from the committee, please? Barbara, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bob, are we still in negotiations with the Coast Guard to see if they're going to change their mind about ripping away our boats?
Those discussions are still, we haven't had any recently. We are in the process of gathering data on the conditions at the north and south inlets. That was one of the things that we talked about with the Coast Guard was, their contention that the surf conditions don't rise to the status of surf conditions, and our contention that that's not accurate. So for the last 2 months, we have been doing a joint exercise going out every day, Coast Guard and Harbor Master staff, to record the conditions on the 2 inlets, and we will be continuing that through Memorial Day weekend. And then we will get back with the Coast Guard based on what all that data shows.
Thanks, Bob.
Tommy Doan.
I'd like, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to move that we approve this.
I'd like to second it.
All right. Any further questions for Bob or Alex, please? Barbara.
Yes.
Joanne. Joanne.
Yes.
Yep, there she is. I knew you were out there. Andy.
It's beyond ironic that they're having trouble with their 45 footers. I vote yes.
Thank you. Tommy.
Yes.
John Whalen.
Yes.
John Papalardo.
Yes.
Chair votes yes. 7-0 for the transfer from the Finance Committee Reserve Fund.
Thank
All
you
right.
very much.
Congratulations, Bob. You better call those guys right now.
Yep. Thank you.
Of course.
Thank
Thank you. Okay. So Alex, we're 1 shy. We're 3 minutes late. I don't know if people saw my email, but with the most sincere apologies, we have to postpone Thursday's meeting. I've got to go back up to Boston. For Thursday morning, we'll not be back in time. So check your emails. I've sent a note to see whether it might be possible to reschedule the last of our work for either next Tuesday or next Wednesday. I'm sorry, next Tuesday or next Thursday, 19 or 21 at 1:30. Check your emails and respond to me if you would, please. Again, I apologize for the short notice, but out of my control. And Alex, I think if I'm correct, we'll have, I think we're down to 10 or 11 articles that we should be able to move through fairly reasonably in one meeting. So that's what we got. Anything further, Alex, from your perspective?
No, I will send an updated scorecard around to the committee so we can see where we're at. And once we decide on the schedule, on the meeting next week, we'll get the packet out.
Terrific. Thank you. Any further comments or questions from members of the committee? I'll take a motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Thank you, Andy. Barbara?
Yes.
Joanne?
Yes.
Thank you, Andy.
Yeah.
Tommy?
Yes.
John Whalen?
Yes.
I'm Papalardo.
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. We are adjourned. Thank you all for your time, and hope you have a nice couple of days.
Thank you.